his PhD has been in sociology of technological cultures. He has curated a couple of those perception conferences in which he's collaborated with Ivan Illich as well, and had done a book, co-authored a book on speed. You know, often design schools get prejudged by the image that word design evokes. But design schools actually have a deeper spine to them, which is informed by this concept of design thinking. Now, design thinking essentially is the capacity to imagine new possibles, to imagine new possibilities, to imagine new futures. And I think this part of design now is being sought by many institutions. Design thinking is being taught now in management schools, in engineering colleges, to try and generate new ways of doing things, new ways of imagining things, and so on. So that's an idea that we share, and I think he has used this very well to see and spot what was emerging as a counterculture to what the larger technological world was sort of thrusting on us. So there have been huge amounts of counter actions, and in those actions he saw possibility of a new kind of a culture emerging. And in response to that culture, emergence of that culture, he coined a new word. I will leave it to him to describe what that word is.
Thank you for the introduction. People ask me, what do you do? And I never know what to say because I've strung together so many things in different ways over the last 20 years, and starting more with looking at the impact of technology, but in the last few years actually looking much more at culture and what culture is and how culture changed. If I put it myself in what motivates me most and what I'm interested in is how we collectively shape the future through culture and what that means, and how we can be mindful ourselves on what our culture consists of and what the elements are in cultural change that can get us to better futures. So, but let me start very practical in a sense, and I raised it in one of the plenary discussions before, in my hometown in Amsterdam, in Holland, where there is this group, this cultural center, that tried to coin the phrase New Amsterdam, which in I did also lectures in America. It's quite funny because of course New Amsterdam is the first old name of New York, and they started laughing. But I mean really New Amsterdam, the 21st century Amsterdam, where there's been an incredible resurgence and dynamic of social initiatives in the city, which, as I mentioned before, in the last 5 years there, we tried to put them on the map, 250 or 300 of these initiatives, and it doesn't stop, and it's actually the most dynamic area of the local society, of the local economy as well, because of the recession, there's no building going on, and there's other things going on. So you have pop-up stores, and you have urban gardening, you have sharing places, or you mentioned the repair cafes, or you have bikes that are shared. It also connects very much to the makers movement. I just flag it here. I don't know whether people know about the Etsy. eBay is like eBay platform worldwide now. They're incredible. They've got really 10,000 makers now actually selling in the world, mostly in the West, through this website. For the first time, they have $1 billion turnover, of which the platform Etsy only takes 3.5%, and 96.5% goes to the makers, which is unique. If I publish a book like I will talk about, I'll be lucky if I get 3.5% as the maker, and 96.5% goes to everybody else. So, but what I'm trying to get at is not so much the phenomenon itself. I mean, it is about those, but it's what is going on here and what's new about this, and how can we gauge this. Um, these are in the city, bottom-up, grassroots, neighborhood-led, social initiative. You can call them what you want to. Different. No doubt there's terms. I was talking yesterday was the French term for it. We couldn't quite discover it, but I think in every language there's different words. In America you would call it grassroots, and if I talk to people from London, they talk about the civic economy. And I summarize by saying it's the power of the C's. It's quite a nice number of words that start with a C: collaborative, community, citizen, civil society, commons. Crucial concept I think that we should reinvent. Maybe that's for something for discussion. I don't dwell on it. Some people call it collaborative commons. I don't know if people know Jeremy Rifkin's book. I do recommend I work his last book, where he's in a very interesting way connects technological change, social change, the open source movement to really new ways of collaborative creating the future. So what I'm actually talking about is something which is deeply cultural, and I call it a cultural shift because I think it represents not just doing the same things differently, it's really doing different things in every sense. If I refer to what's being said about education, when traditionally we talk about knowledge and skills and attitudes, on all those scores it is a fundamentally new attitude to quite a number of things. It involves different skills, and actually I think much more than ever before, its practice is way ahead of theory. It's new knowledge that comes out of the practice, which is a very big break from a century or 2 centuries of modernist and enlightened idea that knowledge comes first and then it's applied in practice. And of course, through most of history, this was never the case. It is only the last 200 years that this happened. And now there's sort of a reversal to different things. But this cultural shift, it really is a new ethos, and we have to look at it in that way because it will tell us something about where we can latch on to develop that further. So it's not like a philosophical point of view, it's got ethical values. It has to do with my notion of culture in an anthropological sense. So if you ask what is this cultural shift consists of, it really starts with a fundamental different way of how we look at the world and how we look at nature. I put 4 things in my notebook about this shift. It's a way of looking this is really the attitude thing if you want, but underpinned and mixed with that, it's a shift in the things we really value. In the West there is really something going on, going from materialistic to immaterial values. Of course it's embedded in new practices. I mentioned all these initiatives in the city, connected with different lifestyles. But underneath it, it's also a different model. This may be the beginning of an action perspective, or for designers, a new social design perspective, how we create our own living conditions. I even called it a new cultural era. After 75 years of modernism and modernistic ways of organizing the world, modernistic way of looking at the world, modernistic style, there's a new era that is actually already here, because if you think of some of the values that you embody as well, that we all after on social connections and cohesion and sustainability, all kinds of things, there is already really a cultural movement there, and I think it's much more than a counterculture, although it borrows from the counterculture of the 70s. It is really a cultural movement, and my estimate that there is already, at least if you add up all the people associated with NGOs and social initiatives, from women's groups and social justice to environmental groups, you have at least 200 million people that already actively embody, live, practice that ethos. This is a considerable thing. So much so, if it's a new culture, if it's so fundamentally changed, it's a paradigm shift that we see, and I'm talking very much from probably a Western and Northern point of view, but I think being at the forefront of also, I think here in India, as an outsider, coming here with a new leader like Modi, who's of course an ultra-modernist, it's very interesting to see that what comes beyond modernism, which is already beginning in the West, and it's not postmodernism, it's not post-postmodernism, it really needed a new name, and this is why my designer, friend, colleague, who is Dutch but lives in New York already 35 years, Joost Elvers, in discussion, in trying to make a book about the new culture, culture. We need a new name, like modernism, we need some other ism to name this culture. We came up with Sustainism, and to our great surprise, I said the culture of sustainability and everything that comes with it, and we have to discuss what we mean by sustainability. Surely people have already figured this out, that Sustainism is one way of capturing this new paradigm. So I Googled it and I got nothing. So, okay, well then I'll coin the word, and we coined the word Sustainism and wrote this visual graphic manifesto. I just hold it up. I flick it because it's through a number of aphorisms, visually, graphically designed. We're trying to paint a sort of mostly empty canvas on this new paradigm to provoke a discussion what this new Sustainism should and could consist of. The argument was, this came from yourself, who's the designer and the symbol maker and the publisher, saying, if it's a new culture, we should also have new symbols, and we should make a cultural product. So let's make a visual book, which we did, and the book is essentially a manifesto that brings us new words and new symbols to trying to explain, or to not explain, to put up that there may be a real beginning and emerge of a new mindset attached to new lifestyles, and beneath it, there are fundamental value changes going on. And if it is really a paradigm change, which I think we see the beginning, then of course, obviously, what we have been talking about in the last days, we really have to rethink what do we then mean by sustainability in this new world. We cannot depend on the modernistic, linear, progress-oriented ideas of both sustainability and development. We have to open it up. And as I was trying to make this manifesto, trying to capture some of the essences of this new culture, we had a lot of slogans and things, and it's quite interesting. This is one of the key ones, that everything is interdependent and interconnected, which we didn't realize was Chief Seattle a long time ago, but it's something that is much more to do with the interconnected world that's only been possible in the last 20 years because of internet, because of new technologies, but nonetheless it's becoming very real. I'm just flagging a few things to give you a feel of some of both the way the world has changed and how culturally large groups of people are beginning to look at this world differently. That the whole connection, after having 30, 40 years of globalization, that there is the local is being and has to be redefined. It's no longer the local versus the global. We all know that we are in many ways locally rooted. Local relationships are important, and probably the most important, but we can't deny that we're in a globalized world, so we have to rethink those kind of things. The new culture of Sustainism is also a culture of open source and of Creative Commons, and so that's also something, a very mentality thing that you see in all kinds of areas. We were talking the other day about some group in London who started Dicky House, which is trying to do building where we share our design for houses, and it's like an open source design, and so it can be done locally. We also in the manifesto played with words like the modernist credo in design of like less is more, to say that's no longer what we should be after, do more with less, that becomes a more approach. But just when all those kind of fundamental things change in people's perception of who they are and how the local is related to the global, or how they have to act, or whether information should be open and what's the new commons, it's clearly that when we talk about sustainability, we have to go well beyond green in a sense of that it's all about the physical environment and our impact on it and our relationship with nature in itself. And that's of course a crucial, I'm not trying to push it aside as if that's not an issue, but to me it's embedded in this cultural change. So in my ways, if I put my sociological hat on, I would say that the sustainability is a value, and a very important one, just as much as other values are there as well, and we shouldn't set it apart. And it's the relationship between the value that we care for the earth and that we don't destroy the environment to other things, I think is the hallmark of sustainist culture. So it's also a way of combining things, saying the sustainable culture, it is more connected, more localized, but yet in a globalized world, it's more bottom-up, as well as more sustainable. So I think what we're looking for are solutions, and the great examples I've heard from different areas, it was in energy and about zero waste, for example, just to pick up two, that the most exciting solutions to those issues that I've heard and the success stories with energy are indeed the examples where the ecological and environmental sense is linked to the social sense. It's like what Joey said, you cannot redesign the park without redesigning community, or you probably shouldn't redesign the park without thinking about what it has to do with community. So it's a different way of reconnecting the social, the physical, the environmental right from the start, and underpinned, and I have to go quite quickly. I suggest that there are quite a number of values, and they're not new values, but they come back in new forms that underpin the sustainist culture. And I'll leave it to you to, from your own experience, to fill in what they mean. And I picked up 4: connectedness, sharing, localism, proportionality, in addition to this ecological one. Let me very quickly try and spend 30 seconds on each of them, and I'll try to capture them with a sort of slogan. The one is that from now on, and this is something that I'm trying to teach designers, I'm not a designer myself, as Joby said, but I'm more like a design thinker, and also do a lot of things at design and architecture schools to teach new designers and architects, that they all think in terms of object. They want to make a house or a single object, but they have to learn to think in terms of relationships. And the idea that from now on it's about connecting is of course clear, but it also goes on that level that it's actually quite difficult to design a relationship rather than a thing, and it's something that in modern designers they haven't really learned. Another huge development is the sharing economy. It's sometimes referred to as collaborative consumption, and think of what I may call the Facebook generation. What really determines your identity much more than anything else is not who your parents are or what you own, is what you share with others. So there's a real shift on how people do, and the willingness to share a lot more things and being less ownership. The third value is new forms of localism. We don't know yet what they are, but to treat local not as a geographic thing, which it is as well, but something that the value of local relationships, something that's I'd like to maybe, in my last research, begin to talk about as nearby-ness, because it has a note. If someone is near to you, they don't have to be physically near to you. You can think of someone else, but this person you have affection to, and it's a sort of nearness. So we have to design and think that these local things aren't the local in a miniature form of what the government decide is local, going from national, regional to local. It's exactly the other way around. It's the relationships, it's the dynamics, it's the practices, where I started with the bottom-up, community-driven things. They define the local because it's local relationships. And the fourth value is something that not much work has been done, but I think it's quite fundamental, that all of the modernist age had an assumption about scale, that the success of any invention, of anything you did, if you could do more of it, if you could upscale it, and the same with slow and fast, if you could do it faster was better than slower. I'm not arguing that everything small is better than big, because when things are too small they have no impact, but there is a point that we have to think in terms of proportionality. The example I often use is that if I have a favorite restaurant and it has a really great atmosphere and they open a second one, that's fine, and maybe 3 or 4, but we all know once they get 10 or 20 or 50 or let alone 100, then the core qualities of the restaurant is lost. So it's not scale itself, it's the proportion, the relationship to the core values. So that's very briefly, because I'm running over time, I can see, is that a book that was published a year and a half ago in Holland, Sustainist Design Guide took these 4 values and just as an experiment said, what does that mean if we design for these new values? Aren't there already examples that do that? And of course there are, but you have to tease them out to recognize that there is already a new practice of what we call sustainist design, which is this connection between social ecological design. And it was a very fruitful beginning, opening debate that shifting from the sustainability to sustainist on what sort of key values we now have to embrace that we know are emerging. These 4, and of course they're not the only ones, but they give a sense of different things. If I think of design as they design for functionality, efficiency and aesthetics, and more recently a little bit for ecological impact. But what if they start designing, if we collectively start designing our towns, our cities, our houses, our parks with these values? And that was the idea of inserting, again, just a sort of new perspective, a new lens on trying to debate where we go from here with our sustainable practices.
We're all living with these principles, but it's interesting you said that the first time, or one of the rare times, that theory is coming out of practice. So this is my first time seeing the theory perspective of it, because I feel that we're all negotiating these principles, but in a new world, right? So you mentioned the relationship of local to global. So yeah, the things that I learned or appreciated from your talk was the theory coming out of practice, and the looking at local differently. Because I hadn't really thought much about that. You said local is not a geographical place, but related to our relationships, right?
Sustain and sustainability and sustainable development. All these words, sustain means to live or showing its presence. Any system, sustain. Sustainability is existing, showing its presence, or if it refers to the living, it's living. To live. So, when you think of sustainability, it refers to the certain period of time. See, each system has got its own time period. So when you are thinking the sustainability of agriculture or sustainability of human beings on this earth, this all refers to a particular time period. But the nature's rule is nothing is requires it at a particular, after its time is over, it has to change. Change is the nature's principle. So when you are talking about the sustainability means something was there earlier, it is changing, you want to sustain it. For example, traditional agriculture was there. At that time they were thinking that it was a sustainable way of living because agriculture was for subsistence agriculture, not the economic or business. That was sustainable. When it moved towards profit, marketing, business, it became unsustainable. So, whether is it possible to, how long it can be sustainable? You have to think the time period also. Because the nature wants, it is our wish or desire, but nature's design is something else. It keeps on, it's a very dynamic. The principles of the nature are dynamic. Any system will not remain quite a long time when its period of existence ends.
We really have a poverty of language. We have to acknowledge that. And even my attempt to, with this word sustainism or sustainist, that it's, my role is like I'm a cartoonist. I've drawn one of the balloons, someone is saying something. I know that the shape of the balloon and the color of the balloon is fundamentally different from a modernist balloon. But what's actually being said in that balloon, I don't know. We have to find out for ourselves altogether, and there may be different meanings. So it's not going to help us. We have to have this is about the fabric dialogue. We have to dialogue about that. We cannot say, Okay, what is it now? Sustainability, isn't that about sustaining over time? I don't know. I mean, that's about time. Maybe sustain, the word is also to do with sustenance. So maybe it's sustaining, not of time, but of place. Maybe sustainability has to do with groundedness, with connected to the earth, or centering in ourselves, or a certain mindset. So I think we have to, in a way, hold back this scientific, analytical, modernist drive that, I mean, we're all modernists, but we're all being raised and educated in modernism, so it's very difficult to get away from that. We have to postpone a little bit of like, what is then the definitive definition of Sustainism? But I want to link this to the first point about what are then concretely, because I think it's so interesting the word is just an opening. It's opening a door or a window to a different, changing the conversation. But now we have the conversation. So what's the conversation about? It's not about the word. The conversation should indeed be, there's two things that drive me most for myself to look at. One is the notion of local, which, as I said before, the local and the global are not opposites anymore. We embody them both. But we know that if we live globally, we have global lifestyles, it's in many ways meaningless. We do lose all kinds of connections that we talked about before. So we have to redefine the local and practice it and find what it means to organize locally, to live locally and think about this. And the other thing, which is probably more political, and equally difficult, is that we have to recapture this idea of commons. Most of organizational theory, political theory, governance and so on, at least in the West, and I think it's here the same, has been mostly on public or private or combinations between it. But this third space, which is fundamentally different, this idea of how to deal with our commons, really is one of the key questions I think we have to address. So I resonate with you say this local is important and these things have to, but it's already important, I think, to be mindful of these kinds of concepts, to then try to give the meaning and fill them, because we have to change the conversation in our dialogues.
I think the Gandhian model was, the Swadeshi model was similar to what you beautifully put it together, yes. But a lot of us interpreted it as Indianness. No, he was more talking exactly this.